Anything short of a randomized trial, you're always scratching your head saying, was it the treatment, or was it the passage of time, or was it that the parents got a new reading set of materials in the house? And that's why the gold standard is these randomized trials, because they're the only true experiments we can do. Make sense? Now, how many kids have a learning disorder? Let's focus on reading disorders now. Well, it's a trick question. How many kids have ADHD? Depends on where you put the cutoff. How many people have depression? Well, on the depression screener, what score does it require? Learning disorders, just like ADHD, just like depression, just like high blood pressure, it depends on where you put the cutoff. How bad in reading do you have to be failing to get a disorder? Well, it should be 50%. If you're reading under 100, the bottom half, you're not, no, we don't want to label half the population. So is it below 85? Is it the bottom 15%? Is it below 75? The bottom 5 or 6%? If you do studies to look at where we should draw the cutoff, so you could draw the cutoff here, here, or here, somewhere around 5 to 7% of kids who were really at the lowest in phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, these are the kids, again, regardless of their IQ score, who are going to have real problems making gains in reading. So we think the prevalence is maybe 5. Some people would say, no, it's really higher, it's 10%. But it's kind of like the ADHD conundrum. Depends on where you put the cut. So we have a question here. So you've got a reading score of 90, so you're in the bottom 38%. You're at risk for reading problems. We don't care about your IQ score anymore. Maybe that's going to predict you're going to have math and other problems too. But if you take the IQ score out, the reading problems are usually predicted by 4 phonological awareness, so you kind of ignore the IQ score. Make sense? Somebody else, right back here. So we did this with ADHD, looking at the testing policies, right? The states that really put a premium on testing, ADHD diagnoses rise. It's not as clear-cut, public, private, or state policies in schools for learning disability, because it's hard to get a learning disability diagnosis, because the only way the states allow it through the discrepancy model. So they're using a model that's kind of out of date. And it's because you've got to show this big gap, whatever state policy you have doesn't really predict whether that gap will show up or not. If the states went to, and the districts went to, a more absolute phonological or reading score down, I think we'd find more influence. Sure. Sure it does. Well, it's a lot about money for the public schools, which are broker and broker, and the more kids who get referred for special ed, they take up a disproportionate share, and the administrators say we've got to do better general education, not just special education, and so by keeping the discrepancy model and by keeping weight to fail, they keep kids out of special ed in the early grades. But these are the kids with a different model of it, with more group interventions classroom-wide, might be prevented from the weight and fail later. It's also our one-on-one models of special ed are out of sync with what really is needed. I know it's not a perfect answer, but that's how I think about it. How about boys versus girls? Well, what's our rule of thumb throughout the whole course? The first 10 years of life, sorry guys, we're at risk. Autism, 5 to 1. ADHD, 3 to 1. Life course persistent conduct disorder, 5 or 6 to 1. Tourette's disorder we haven't talked about, 5 to 1. Boys are at risk for these early neurodevelopmental problems. And if you go to school districts, what are the rates, gender-wise, for reading disorder? It's usually about 3 to 1. Because who gets referred? The boys who aren't only having trouble reading, but the boys who are aggressive and screwing up in class. If you go to a whole district and give reading tests, so you're not saying who gets referred in often for disruptive behavior, what's the actual rate of reading disorders by gender? There's still more boys and girls, but it's under 2 to 1. So as you get out of the preschool years and the brain's maturing, a lot of girls are at risk for reading disorders too, but they don't get referred because they're more suffering quietly, because they don't have the other risk factors for externalizing behavior. So one of the exceptions, at least partially, to this first 10 years of life, second 10 years of life stereotype is that girls have nearly, not quite as much, closer to the same amounts of reading disorders as boys. But again, why don't they get referred? Because they're not showing the comorbid externalizing problems. If you've got a reading disorder, there's a decent chance you'll be diagnosed with ADHD too. But the question I had a few minutes ago, most kids with a reading disorder look like they have ADHD when they're reading. But in order to make a real diagnosis, you have to look at their attention when they're not reading. So if you've got a reading disorder and it's really carefully assessed, what are the chances you'll be diagnosed with ADHD if it's carefully assessed? About 25%. So if you had the Venn diagram, the circles would overlap, be 25% in the middle. Is that comorbidity? Remember, comorbidity is 2 independent things. Let's say that the prevalence of ADHD is 10%. Let's say that the prevalence of reading disorder is 10%. If it's really comorbidity, it just happens by chance, what should the overlap be? Remember? Heads, 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 a half times a half times a half. If it's really independent, what are the odds that a kid has both ADHD and reading disability? 10% of 10%, 1%. So what's the actual overlap? 25%. 25 times higher than you predict by chance. There may be, and this is where a lot of genetic research is going now, there may be some common genes that underlie both inhibitory control and sustained attention and phonological processing. Because there's way more overlap, 25 times more, than you'd predict if they really just went together by happenstance. Not every kid with ADHD has a reading disorder, not every kid with reading disorder has ADHD, but the overlap is much more prevalent than if they were truly independent. And we talked about conduct problems before, we're not going to worry about that. What happens if you really do have a reading disorder? You get either chastised by, all the way to yelled at by teachers. Why aren't you reading? I need you to pay attention over here. We'll pick on Shake, the GSI, because he's a guy. Shake, you're not reading the way the rest of the class is. Get your book open. Shake starts to internalize this. I guess I'm stupider than the rest. Makes him even more anxious when he tries to read. Other kids say, I guess Shake isn't just, maybe Shake should have that dunce cap on, like in the old days, right? There are lots of social and peer and self-esteem problems that go with the history of reading disorder, because you're called out and singled out as, you're the stupid one. In our society, everybody reads, damn it, and if you're not, there's something wrong with you. What happens during homework? The kid's doing anything to avoid reading. And the family said, but you have to read, and we promise you the reward, and now you're going to be grounded for the next year if you don't get your reading out right now. And the kid says, yeah, right, Mom. Empty threats. It's almost like that coercive discipline we talked about. So this is how learning disorders can escalate into more externalizing problems. Self-image gets worse year by year for people with learning disabilities. Stigma, we talked about this at the very beginning of the lecture. Come on, you're not in the retarded kids class. You're not in the State Institute. You look pretty smart to me. You must be stupid. You can't read. So the stigma is great, especially when our society values performance and achievement the way we do. So the consequences of having a learning disorder, especially in reading, can be profound. What's going on underneath? What did we think 50 years ago? The child was carrying an unconscious anxiety. There might have been a conflict between mom and dad, et cetera, and the child isn't reading because that might disrupt the family system. Those models of reading disorder are kind of out of favor. In fact, what's the heritability of reading disorder? At least 60%. There are genes that, and we don't know exactly which, although we've got a better idea of specific genes for expressive language and reading disorder than we do for ADHD or depression or even bipolar disorder. We know that some of them load on chromosome 6, et cetera, et cetera. There's some families, one famous family in Canada, others in other parts of the world, where half of the guys have very serious expressive language disorders and reading disorders, and they've actually plucked out and found the exact genes that are predicting that. So whether you can quickly and automatically, when you're 3, 4, and 5, look at those little symbols the preschool teacher's putting in front of you and make sense of them, or whether you struggle with it, is largely dependent on the genes you're born with. When did this come to matter? Just like with ADHD, when we invented compulsory education. Because most kids never went to school. Most kids didn't have to learn to read. Only the kids of the rich or the elite. Now that every kid's got to learn to read, if you've got the genes that make your auditory processing system slow, you're likely to be diagnosed at some point with a reading disorder. Interesting things happen when you put people with reading disorders, even adults. Because many adults, you learn to read sight words, but you're still not a smooth reader if you haven't had intervention as a kid. So if I'm an adult with a pretty classic reading disorder, and you put me in the brain scanner, and I've got, obviously you're not going to probably bring a book in, but through the window or on the TV screen you're going to ask me to read, and there's a control group of people without a reading disorder, what's different about our brains? The good readers, when they're in the brain scanner, what's lighting up? Where's the blood going? Boop, left, temporoparietal, frontal junction, Broca's area. The language areas of the brain light up. You don't need to worry about phonemic awareness. And you did that when you were 4, 5, and 6. Now when you're reading, you're comprehending. What does the brain of someone with a reading disorder, same age, look like? The cerebellum's lighting up, and the frontal lobes are lighting up, and the right side of it. It's like the whole brain saying, help, we can't do this very well. They're calling out the fire brigade from all the different towns. People who are reading disordered don't have this automatized smooth reading process, so their brains are working overtime to try to get something together to understand those words. What's really interesting is if you do some controlled interventions, and you get kids who have pretty serious reading problems, and you work with them for a year or two and their reading is better, their brains look very different 2 years later. Their brains are much more efficient and really lighting up the language areas as opposed to being activated everywhere else before. So psychological reading interventions show that the brain is plastic. You can actually change the wiring of the brain to make it more efficient. So that's very biological, but what happens if you have a history of reading problems? You give up. Your self-esteem drops, family stress, all the stuff we just talked about. Now, we've hardly touched on dyscalculia, math disorders, writing disorders. Much less is known, but especially in math, there may be some specific brain regions and some general ones, because higher order math requires a lot of thinking in a lot of different ways that underlie, and there might be some specific heritabilities there too. So, what are you going to do for somebody with a reading disorder? What medications are there? So here's a new word, nootropic medications. Medications that enhance your learning. Maybe these are some of the acetylcholine meds that are used for people with Alzheimer's now. Or maybe even stimulants used for ADHD. Maybe they help poor readers learn to read better. No magic bullet yet. There's no pill for reading disorder yet. If you've got bad ADHD on the side, the medicine will help you focus, but the med doesn't give you the phonological skills. Should you go with a reading disorder and stay in regular third grade, or should you be pulled to special ed? Huge debate. If the special ed is with teachers who think you can't learn and there's low expectations and you're stigmatized and pulled out, probably no, but you might need pullouts or shorter homework assignments or specific intervention to help your reading. So here's the big debate, the third bullet here. If I'm really weak at this phonological processing and awareness, should you drill me on it and teach me these sounds and auditory discrimination, or should you play to my strengths and maybe I learn to read on the basis of sight words only? Right? It's like for anything else. Do you play to the strength or do you try to remediate the weakness? And the answer today is a kind of guarded, we should probably work on both. Some people are never going to develop phonological skills the way most of the rest of the world can, and you want to help kids learn to use other strategies to read, but what's the biggest predictor of a kid overcoming a reading disorder? The number of hours practice reading they do. Because most kids with a reading disorder hate reading like anything and avoid reading. So motivation, behavioral programs, practice, practice, practice. There's some interesting technology now that helps you through computer-enhanced technology extend sounds. You start off hearing a sound more slowly, then it's sped up to real time, trying to get the auditory system caught up. Computer-assisted learning. Wouldn't that be the answer? Because then you can individualize. You don't have to rely on one teacher with 29 kids. What happens with any fourth grade teacher? You've got 2 kids working at first grade level, 2 kids who should be in college already, and everything in between. The teacher has to teach to the mean. But what if you've got a couple of kids in there with pretty serious reading disorder? The teacher's having an impossible time trying to tailor. So maybe computerized strategies that say, you're at this level, like the old SRA series, you're at the purple level, we're going to give you the drills, computer assisted after school, and then we're going to move you up. Reading disorders take a lot of work, a lot of intervention, a lot of motivation and reward, but many people with reading disorders can become proficient readers. What's the one way to ensure that won't happen? The wait and fail method. Waiting year after year before you get assessed and diagnosed. By then, even if you do get in a program, your motivation's low and your self-esteem is probably tanked. Questions about learning disorders, reading disorders treatment? Right here. Right, so is dyslexia specific? Well, first of all, dyslexia, this Greek term, is kind of vague. Most people would say, let's call it a learning disorder, reading disorder now. Secondly, by definition, if you've got dyslexia or reading disorder, you're hearing okay, but what if you have a subtle hearing loss at high frequencies? There may be subtle perceptual problems that are part of the reason why you've got these phonological awareness problems. So it's not like your perceptual systems are perfectly fine. Everything's kind of rough around the edges. Yeah. So one of the theories underlying the program from Professor Merzenich at UCSF. Merzenich 15 years ago said, the real problem with reading disorder is that people cannot distinguish sounds. Now, I'm talking my usual pretty fast talk, and you have to understand these phonemes I'm putting together words within microseconds. What if you're a 4-year-old kid, and I'm talking so fast you can't hear me? So the idea there is, you do computer-assisted learning, and you extend the speech like this. And it sounds kind of funny, but now the kid says, holy shit, that guy was actually saying those words the first time I could hear them. And then you gradually up the speed over time, so that I'm learning to hear the sounds in sequence. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts. Can you pair the sounds and language to music? And kids have good tonal abilities and works for some kids, but it's not a big evidence base yet. So we'll see you next week.